Hello, everyone. This is Tommi Vincent, your host of In Her Words, a Tommi Vincent podcast. And today we have joining us at the table, Pamela Wheeler. Pamela is an accomplished leader with nearly 3 decades of experience improving diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, which is DEIB, outcomes for employees, clients, partners, and communities. She currently serves as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at NFP. Pam's work has impacted such organizations as the National Football League, and she is the previous director at the Women's National Basketball Players Association. Pam, welcome to the table. I'm delighted that you are coming to stay a while.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me, Tommi.
Absolutely. So our very first question, or my very first question that I have for you today, who is Pamela Wheeler?
Oh my gosh. You just started. I thought you were going to do me a little lob pass. You just started. You go right at it. No, I always just consider myself a blessed little Black girl from New Rochelle, New York, who had some dreams and was able to fulfill them. I know this podcast is talking about women in sports, and my father loves to tell the story that I told him when I was 5 or 6 years old that I was going to be a sports attorney. I'm really not sure where I got that from, probably some combination of watching Perry Mason and liking sports, but just really feel blessed to have been able to fulfill those dreams. And feel even more blessed to hopefully have made some impact along the way. So that's who I am, just somebody who just feels really blessed to be in the space that they're in.
Mm-hmm. So I know that you just shared that the story about your dad and how he shares how you got on this journey where you are today. Oftentimes, there's these paths that we travel to get to where we are today. And in that path, we may have some experiences that show up that don't look anything like where we are today. So can you share with us a job experience that you had early on that has absolutely nothing to do with DEIB work?
So funny, when I went to undergraduate school, my dream again was to go to law school. And so I had no indications at all. When I was in undergrad, I majored in history and religion. I didn't know anything about finance. I didn't know anything. I avoided math classes like the plague. I fulfilled my liberal arts requirements by taking like some earth moon classes and some earth science classes. And I ended up getting a job after undergrad in working at Chase Manhattan Bank. And at the time, I guess they still have them. It was one of those executive management training programs where they train you for a year and then place you somewhere in the organization to become a young up-and-coming management or leader in the company. And after I graduated the program, I became an officer, which means that I was then capable of signing for transactions. And I remember it was Labor Day weekend, and I guess I was just excited to get out there. And some of our accountants and some of our administrators had a transaction for $180 million. And I signed it, but then I forgot to sign to make the cash available. So what that meant was that over Labor Day weekend, we had $180 million overdraft. Okay? So you can imagine what it was like when I walked in there Tuesday morning and everyone's standing there looking at me going, you didn't make the cash available and we just had $180 million overdraft in a custody account. So it was, believe me, I would have been I wanted to be anyone except me that day. Okay? But I tell you, so you say a trend, a job experience that doesn't have anything to do with what I'm doing right now. It doesn't have technically anything to do with what I'm doing right now, but it had a lot to do substantively, in the sense that that was the moment in my life when I was like, you got to get the details down. I'm so busy up in the sky. Oh yeah, I'm signing transactions and I'm the assistant treasurer and I'm the relationship manager. And I didn't ask the right questions.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have the details down, so that's an experience that has stayed with me. It literally feels like that was yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Just how impactful that was on the rest of the way I conducted my career and my life. And so, although it's completely outside of what I'm doing, it has had a tremendous impact on how I have continued my career.
Mm-hmm. So now thinking about that experience and even some other opportunities that came down the pipeline for you before you really started to get into the DEIB work, do you ever reflect back on those experiences and how your work today, how it could have impacted those environments and really shifted the work culture there?
So a lot of my work started so after I graduated from undergrad, I went to law school, and then that's when I got into the sports industry while I was in law school, and then afterwards. After law school, I worked for Bob Wolf Associates. And at that time, I said Bob Wolf was probably like your first mega agent, if you will. We have a lot of them now, but at the time, he was probably the first one. And then it was also the advent of the large one-stop shopping media corporations getting into the sports industry, so that they were buying up agencies. And so that was the advent of your ProServes, your David Fawkes Group, Fame, those types of organizations. And so Arnold Communications actually purchased Bob Wolf Associates. And that's when I moved from strictly the player marketing and player negotiation side to actually sports and entertainment marketing for corporations. And so I was involved in a lot of work with helping some banks and some other Fortune 500 and Fortune 1000 companies create sports and entertainment marketing packages and pathways. And also part of that was, since it was an advertising agency, I was involved in some advertising campaigns and development of them. And I just remember one of my first ones was one of my first entrees into that. It was a completely different world for all of us who had been on the sports side, to be in this advertising sort of creative space. And I remember being in one of our first meetings. It was for a bank. And what they would do is they would bring different parts of the organization together. So if you were on our side, which was the sports marketing and entertainment side, and then they would bring the creative people together. And they would bring you all together, and you would be in a room and you'd watch sort of one of the first commercials that they would put together for this client. And it was a bank, and it was on the personal line side. So they were talking about the accessibility of getting loans. And they had about 5 different scenarios, because that's how they work. They had like 5 different ones. Some would play regionally in different places. And we were all sitting there, and they had like 5 different scenarios. And out of all the 5 scenarios, the only Black people that were involved was a single mother and a child. All the other 4 scenarios were the complete, families, husband, wife, two kids and a dog, that sort of thing. And so I was sitting in the room, and I remember this being my first actual foray into this work. And I looked around and I said, no one notices anything strange. No one notices anything about the different scenarios. And I was the only person that noticed that the other 4 scenarios had a complete nuclear family. But the one with the Black people was just a mom and a child. And so that was my entree into this work. And so I knew then that I was like, you have to have a voice. And, it's difficult when you're a junior person. So I understand that too, being a junior person and having a voice. It's hard. You don't want to lose your job. You haven't built up the equity in the company to even say anything. So from that perspective, I think that I knew kind of early on that was going to be a place where I wanted to make an impact. And, sometimes it's easier when early in my career where you are maybe the only Black person, the only Black woman. So people are looking to you to have to open up that space. And so I was looking forward to doing it and opening up that space for other people too.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you something, because you called out something that it still happens, where you'll see the narrative that's being promoted through the marketing campaigns, and it's never the representation of the Black family can fall flat on the full breadth of what family looks like, period. Every family, there are different dynamics in every single family across this globe. What do you think happens? Is it processing? Is it because you're looking to speak to a very specific audience? Like, where is the breakdown of why those types of campaigns still are being pushed out from a marketing perspective with all types of products, and industries?
I think it's all about evolution too, because when I first started in this work, diversity was man, woman, black, white. That was pretty much it. We didn't really think of diversity in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so even in the work that I'm doing right now, we're expanding what we even mean by diversity. Diversity is representation.
Mm-hmm.
And we are all we have this interconnectivity, and we're multifaceted. Certainly when you look at me and you, obviously we're Black women, but we're more than just Black women, right? We're moms,
Absolutely.
we're sisters, we're friends, we're sorority sisters, I'm a lawyer, everyone, you're so many different things, and you have so many facets to who you are. And I think that it's about evolution and understanding that. And so as you
Mm-hmm.
begin to see now people understanding that, one, we've got to go beyond man, woman, black, white, and understand that people are multifaceted, and how do we actually embrace this level of diversity? We're now focusing in a lot on military veterans in a way that we didn't focus on 10 years ago, 5 years ago. We're focusing now on LGBTQ community, Asian community, neurodiversity, disability community. So I think it's just about evolving and understanding that we need to be more inclusive and less exclusive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So can you, for us, really give us, let me see how to say this, like a layman's term definition of DEIB, so that sometimes it's always present, and the opportunity to evolve in it is always on the table for all of us. Can you talk about it in a way where everybody can go, oh, okay, now I understand what this work entails and how it shows up in everyday life?
So I'm glad you asked that question, because a lot of what I do is talk about what is DEIB, what are we even talking about? And I kind of equate it to the old car alarms. Remember how car alarms used to just go off and people after a while just stopped listening to them and use this? I think that's what has happened with D&I, right? I think people have just been using that terminology and have absolutely, no idea what it means. And then at a certain point, we just were using it, not really even caring whether we knew what it means. So, and now I think we've evolved. We've evolved from D&I to DEI to DEIB. And so diversity is really representation. It's numbers. It's who we are. If you, in basic layman's terms, we can check that box, right? So it's black, white, women. But again, expanding now what we even think about diversity to military veterans, to disabled, to every community that we can think of. So the diversity piece, think about it in terms of demographics. Equity piece, inclusion, the I, is valuing that diversity. There's something about having that diversity that's important. I value that. It's not just the fact that I want women at my organization, but I understand that women bring a different perspective to it. So the I piece is valuing that diversity. The equity piece is actually treating that diversity fairly, so that I'm saying I don't not only want women in my organization because I value women, but now I'm going to pay them accordingly, right? I'm going to treat them fairly now, right? There's one thing to just say, I value you, but now I'm going to treat you fairly. The belonging piece is now I understand that I've brought you here, you bring value, I may pay you fairly, and now I'm going to empower you to be successful. That's the belonging piece. It's that I'm going to empower you now to not only be the only woman sitting in the leadership meetings, and I'll appease you by paying you a little bit, but I'm also now going to empower you, make you feel like you belong, so that now you can make decisions about the business. You can impact the business. And so I often talk a lot about this, the equity piece. I have been fighting for that E for a long time, especially being the director of the WNBA Players Association. Right? So I was there for 15 years. So I spoke a lot and still do speak a lot about gender equity. And so I usually always start off by asking people, how many of you have heard of the WNBA? And most people, raise their hands like, I've heard of the WNBA. I'm like, so what does the WNBA mean to you? And a lot of them will say a lot of different things. It means it represents women's empowerment. It represents great social advancement. It represents ways for fathers and daughters to connect in a way that they couldn't connect before. So it has some value to it. That's the I piece. And then my next question is, how many of you have actually purchased a ticket? Right? And not too many hands go up. Right? That's the equity piece. So you value it. You think women should be playing basketball. There's, you value it. There's important reasons why it should. So that's the inclusion piece. But you haven't made that emotional connection and economic connection. You haven't actually put a dollar to it and actually purchased a ticket. So how do you think this thing is going to be successful, right, if you don't actually buy a ticket? So that's the equity piece. It's the same reason why women make 8% on a dollar, and black women in particular make 6 to 7% on a dollar, because we're not paying them. I'll bring you into my company, but I'm not going to pay you the same amount. And then likewise with the belonging piece, I'll bring you in. You can be a member of the board, but we don't necessarily need to hear your ideas. Right? So that's the belonging piece. So I hope that's a layman's definition, and I hope that was clear.
No, it was very clear. So is this work culture? Is this work environment? Like what is this shifting in corporations?
For me, it's about systems and cultures, and understanding that this DEIB work has to be systemic and it has to be cultural. We have to change the systems and cultures that we operate in. First, understanding too that the systems need to be changed because they're working the exact way they were designed to work, right? So I think sometimes it makes us feel better if we kind of say, well, the systems are working this way because they sort of have this disparate impact on the Hispanic community. They have a disparate impact on the Latina community or Hispanic community. And I contend that, no, the systems are working exactly the way they was designed to work. They were designed to keep white, straight men in power. Jim Crow laws didn't have a disparate impact on black people. They were specifically designed to prevent black people from voting. So we have to understand that we're talking about systemic change and cultural change. Culture is what's being said, to whom it's being said, and when it's being said. And we have to address those things, first being honest with what we're doing, understanding that programs, like my daughter would be so offended if she heard me say she's about to turn 16. Miss me with the programs, miss me with the lunches and, just the straight $100,000 donation to the NAACP. We're talking about systemic and cultural change that we have to create within organizations. And so when I'm talking about change within my organization, I'm talking about how are we not just where are we recruiting from, but then when we recruit, we got to train our managers to then hire those people. Right. And then once they get into the organization, we have the pathways within the organization to help them be successful and thinking about success differently. That's what DEIB work is all about. But it's about systemic and cultural change for me.
So to date, what has been for yourself something that you consider one of your greatest accomplishments or most memorable in this work?
I think my greatest, or the one that I'm most proud of, was when I started at the WNBPA. The players really had nothing. I mean, hence the reason why they decided to unionize, right? They were like, we have nothing here. We got nothing. I mean, if they had anything, they probably wouldn't have unionized, right? So when we first started, they didn't have any guaranteed contracts. They didn't have minimum salaries. There were some players making like $5,000, and some people making $100,000. So they didn't have no minimum salaries. They didn't have year-round medical benefits, no group licensing, marketing rights, no medical benefits, no retirement plan, no maternity benefits. There were no disciplinary guidelines. So they were basically operating on their own. And one of the major things that they did not have was that they did not have free agency. So the way that the WNBA was initially established, it was established as a single entity. So the players signed with the league and then were assigned to a team. And so those of us, most people, basic economics, you can figure out there's no market for player salaries or even player movement at that point. So they weren't able to negotiate with individual teams. They negotiated with the league, and then that was it. So for me, negotiating for free agency for the players. So even after our first collective bargaining agreement, we were still operating under that initial framework. But when we were able to negotiate for free agency, that was a game changer. And it's not just about money. It's not always about money. It's also about where I want to play. And I'm about to retire, so I prefer to be in my home city. Or my skill set would work best with the team in LA as opposed to the team in Chicago. But the players weren't able to do that. And so for me, being able to walk in that room and to walk out with the executive committee and say, we've got free agency for players now, and players can actually sign any contract with any team and be able to move around at their leisure and then create a market, obviously, for their talent, was even better. But that to me was one of the pinnacles of my career.
Mm-hmm. So in the based off of the lesson that you gave us in layman's term, the league started out with diversity because we were bringing some women into a professional sport that was men-based. And then there was inclusion, but it lacked equity and also belonging.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, I'm probably gonna get myself in trouble for saying this, but that was also the other dichotomy with working, because when the WNBA was started, it was started by the NBA, right? And so a lot of the framework that they had was based on, and still to this day, it's some of it is still the same, and it has evolved a little bit, but the framework was a framework that would have worked for men, right? But it didn't work for women. And I remember the first negotiation session that we had, and I said, what are we going to do about maternity benefits? And because this is pretty much the same people on the NBA side who were negotiating for the men and the same people on our side who negotiated for the men and now the women. Everybody just kind of put their pens down and was like, guess we need to talk about that. You started a league and didn't think about maternity. I mean, but so that's what we're talking about. It's like that, Tommi, you framed it perfectly. We're talking about a league, and this the same way that things work out in corporate America, right? We have this framework that we're utilizing for basically white men, and we want everyone else to fall into this framework. And we got to understand that this is about looking at success differently. The framework that you have for men is not going to work for the framework that you have for women. And so there were a number of different areas that impacted that the same way, even the way we talked about career development for the WNBA players versus the NBA players. Completely different completely different conversation, but the framework under which they were operating was what they thought was going to work for the women too. And it just didn't work that way.
Do you have any words of wisdom that you would share with others with this, tall task of shifting and impacting DEIB work?
It's a marathon, not a sprint, right? We didn't get here in a
Mm-hmm.
day, and we're not going to get out of here in a day, right? So, and
Mm-hmm.
when you're talking about systemic and cultural change, those are some hard conversations. And quite frankly, if people aren't uncomfortable, then we're not having a hard enough conversation. People need to, the hairs back people's necks need to stand up a little bit. And so it's just, you know, it's just long work. It's interesting since 2020, a lot more corporations and spaces and nonprofits have hired chief diversity officers and diversity people. But the life cycle of a chief diversity officer is only like 2 to 3 years because, and primarily it's because of I think of the level of frustration that you have, that you want to make this impact, you want to make these cultural and systemic change within organizations, but organizations, while they may say they want to, they're not necessarily ready to move. And so I think patience and understanding that it's going to take some time to get where we want to get to. But I think if you have the right framework in place and you have the right people making the commitments at the top and everything, I think that it'll work out. But definitely you got to be patient, because this is as one of my directors always says, this is heart work, not in addition to hard work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're going to move into our next segment, and this segment is I am bringing her to the table with me. And this is your opportunity to give another woman verbal flowers. For you know that you would not be where you are in your career without her fingerprint on your journey.
Wow. I'm gonna get in trouble here from my mother because she's not famous, but my grandmother, really.
Mm-hmm.
She was, so I'll do two people. I'll do someone in professional world, but it wasn't for my grandmother, I definitely wouldn't be here. She's the one that very quiet, didn't speak loudly, but walked with a big stick. You know what I mean? It's just always everything about her was God first, and everything else will come. But one of the things that and it's funny because when you get older, right? I hope one of these days my daughter will listen to some of the stuff I say, because sometimes I think she doesn't. But it's so funny. The things you think about when you're in meetings or you're about to say something. And I often will hear my grandma say, be careful what you say. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Don't, and it comes up every now and then. And it seems like it comes up even more now that the older I get, the more it comes up. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but so she's passed on, but I always give her flowers because that was my girl. So I have to give her flowers, and she was just wonderful. And I know I wouldn't be, the person that I am. And she always would be like, yeah, you deserve whatever you get. You're a good person, things like that. Um, but professionally, and I never met the woman I'm about to say, Anita DeFrance. But when you were coming up in my era, there were only about three black women in sports when I graduated from undergrad. I graduated in '89, and then I graduated from law school in '95. And it was Elaine Weddington Stewart. She was the assistant general manager at the Boston Red Sox, and Anita DeFrance. And there was a woman her name is escaping me. She was the chief of staff at the USOC. And those were the only three black women that I can recall, that I know were in the sports industry at that time. And Anita DeFrance, I don't know if she knows the impact that she has had on young black women and women of color at that time who were aspiring to go into sports, because she was present, and you could always tell her authority. She always presented herself as someone who was authoritative, who was collaborative, who knew how to navigate not only the sports Olympic movement, but just sports in general. And she has had a tremendous impact on my career and my ability to feel like I could do this in a way. And like I said, I've never met her. And so I don't, I don't even know, she probably doesn't even know who I am. But, yeah, but the fact that she had such a tremendous impact, and I would guess if you were to interview, women of my age who are now in sports or went into sports, I would imagine that probably 75 to 90% of the people would say that she probably had a lot more influence on their career path than she probably realizes.
Mm. Thank you for bringing those ladies to the table. And now we'll go into our final segment, which is Food is Love. And my first question for you is, what food best describes your personality and why?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if there's a particular food that describes my personality as much as a course. And I may be in mode because my daughter's Sweet 16 party was Sunday. So, but my favorite time or course is the cocktail hour. That's my favorite, small bites, but having a really good time. And they're usually all very good, right? So that kind of describes me. And I'm an entertainer. My mother is a caterer. Both my grandmothers, every time they were Southern women, so every time you came over, you had to eat the entire time you were there. So for me, people aren't happy unless they're eating, right? My grandmothers would be like, "Let's eat breakfast." 20 minutes later, it's time for lunch. We're like, "We just ate," So we just ate. Why are we doing this? But for me, it's about. I'm a big entertainer, so my house is kind of like entertainment center. So which is why COVID is killing me. But yes, I think my favorite course, if you will, is the happy hour because I'm an entertainer. I think that describes me. I love to see people happy while they're eating. Mm-hmm. And the food usually during the happy hour is usually better than the meal. When you think about it, most places you've gone, you're like, don't miss the happy hour, right? Because the hors d'oeuvres are usually better than the full-on dinner.
Has food ever been healing for you?
Oh yes, yes. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel good. I love to cook, and like I said, my house is kind of like party central, and I like to see people enjoying good food. I like to have people come over and say, "Oh, I didn't know this is something new. Oh, I've never had that before. Wow, this is." So I like to do that, and I like to make what people like. One of my line sisters, she's always like, I sure am in the mood for this, and next thing you know, I'm making it, and I'll call her. She's like, "Oh, okay, I'll be right over." I'm like, "You knew I was going to make it."
Yeah.
Come on over, So my sorority sisters are always over here, and we my husband has kind of like a little man cave in the basement, so we watch football on Sundays, and we just eat all day. So I like for people to come over and have a good time and feel like this is home. Before COVID, we had a pretty big Super Bowl party, and I felt so good. A few years ago, one of my friends wasn't able to make it, but she's like, "My son wants to know, can he come?" Because he's like, "Can I just go to Miss Pam's even if y'all can't come?" And I was like, "Of course he can come." But he was the first person here, so that just made me feel good that he felt like this was some place that was home for him, even if his parents weren't here.
Mm-hmm. Does your family have an heirloom recipe that is passed down from generation to generation?
Well, we have a couple. Unfortunately, my grandmother's pound cake, no one has been able to replicate that. And all of our friends are like, how did you let her leave here without anyone knowing how to replicate that pound cake? So her pound cake was absolutely fabulous. No one can make it. My aunt, one of my mother's sisters, has gotten close, but we just haven't been able to replicate. No one's been able to replicate that one. And so that was our one dish that everyone's like, gosh, how did y'all let that one get away? And so unfortunately, that one has to stop at this generation because none of us can figure it out.
Unless somebody figures it out.
Unless someone figures it out. And like I said, one of my mother's sisters has gotten close, but there's still like this like line or something. Like, what is that's happening here? So it looks like a butter line or something is not happening. So we can't figure it out. And I don't eat those other chitlin things, and everybody's like, somebody better figure out how to make those. My mother at this point is the only one that can make those. I'm like, well, y'all better figure that out because I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. I don't care if that one dies. Okay? They can have that.
Yeah, we'll do without that one, y'all.
Yeah,
Well, Pam, I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I'm so glad that you were able to come and stay a while with me at the In Her Words table. How can people stay connected with you?
I want to tell everyone, you can follow up with me on LinkedIn. That's a great place.
Mm-hmm.
But be patient with me because sometimes I don't necessarily respond quickly. But if you reach out to me on LinkedIn, I try my best to connect with people. And I really also, I do try to connect with young people who want to get into the industry. I also still teach at Columbia. I teach in the graduate sports management program. So I really like to stay connected to young people who want to get into this business and give them some advice about how to do it because people helped me out along the way, so I want to make sure that I'm doing that. So you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. Just give me a minute to respond.
Okay. Understood. Loud and clear. Well, thank you so much. And just know that you're welcome at the table anytime.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it, Tommi. And please, anytime you invite me back, I'll be here.